So today I'm starting off at the very end of chapter 31 because I don't know what happened. It got cut off. So where I left off, the Reverend said, now my little country girls will be warm when they come to Sunday school. What do you say, Laura? Ma asked. But the Reverend Alden said, there's no need. The way her eyes are shining is enough. Laura could not speak. The golden brown fur cuddled her neck and softly hugged her shoulders. Down her front, it hid the thoroughbred fastenings of her coat. The muff came up far as her wrists and hid the shortness of her coat sleeves. She's a little brown bird with red trimmings, said Reverend Alden. Then Laura laughed. It was true. Her hair and her coat, her dress and the wonderful furs were brown. Her hood and her mittens and the braid on her dress were red. I'll tell my church people back east about our little brown bird, said Reverend Alden. You see, when I told them about our church out here, they said they must send a box for the Christmas tree. And they all gave things they had. The little girls who sent you furs and Mary's coat needed larger ones. Thank you, sir, said Laura, and please, sir, tell them thank you, too. For when she could speak, her manners were just as nice as Mary's. Then they all said goodnight and Merry Christmas to Reverend Alden. Mary was so beautiful in her Christmas coat. Carrie was so pretty on Pa's arm. Ma and Pa were smiling so happily, and Laura was all gladness. Mr. and Mrs. Olson were going home too. Mr. Olson's arms were full of things, and so were Nellie's and Willie's. No wickedness boiled up in Laura now. She only felt a little bit of mean gladness. Merry Christmas, Nellie, Laura said. Nellie stared while Laura walked quietly on, with her hands snuggled deep in the soft muff. Her cape was prettier than Nellie's, and Nellie had no muff. So that was the end of chapter 31. Chapter 32 is called Grasshoppers Walking. After Christmas, there were a few snowy Sundays, but Pa made a bobsled of split willows, and they all went to Sunday school snug in the new coats and furs, the shawl and the muffler. One morning, Pa said the Chinook was blowing. The Chinook was a warm wind from the northwest. In a day, it melted the snow away, and Plum Creek was running full. Then rains came, pouring day and night. Plum Creek roared, humping down its middle, and swirled far beyond its low banks. Then the air was mild, and the creek was tame again. Suddenly the plums and the willow blossomed, and their new leaves uncurled. The prairies were green with grass, and Mary and Laura and Carrie ran barefooted in the fresh softness. Every day was warmer than the day before, till hot summer came. It was time for Laura and Mary to go to school, but they did not go that year because Pa must go away again, and Ma wanted them home with her. The summer was very hot. Dry, hot winds blew, and there was no rain. One day, Pa came into dinner and said, the grasshoppers are hatching. This hot sun is bringing them up out of their eggs and up through the ground like corn popping. Laura ran out to see. The grass on the knoll was hopping, full of tiny green things. Laura caught one in her hands and looked at it. Its wee, small wings and its tiny legs and its little head and even its eyes were the color of the grass. It was so very tiny and so perfect. Laura could hardly believe it would ever be a big, brown, ugly grasshopper. They'll be big fast enough, said Pa, eating every growing thing. Day by day, more and more grasshoppers hatched out of the ground. Green grasshoppers of all sizes were swarming everywhere and eating. The wind could not blow loud enough to hide the sound of their jaws, nipping, gnawing, chewing. They ate all the green garden rows. They ate all the green potato tops. They ate the grass and the willow leaves and the green plum thickets and the small green plums. They ate the whole prairie, brown and bare. And then they grew. They grew large and brown and ugly. Their big eyes bulged and their legs took them hopping everywhere. Thick over the ground they were hopping, and Laura and Mary stayed in the house. There was no rain, and the days went by hotter and hotter, and uglier, filled with the sound of grasshoppers, until it seemed more than could be borne. They couldn't stand it anymore. Oh, Charles, Ma said one morning, seems to me I just can't bear one more day of this. Ma was sick. Her face was white and thin, and she sat down tired as she spoke. Pa did not answer. For days he had been going out and coming in with a still, tight face. He did not sing or whistle. It was worst of all when he did not even answer Ma. He walked to the door and stood looking out. Even Carrie was still. They could feel the heat of the day beginning. They could hear the grasshoppers. But the grasshoppers were making a new sound. Laura ran to look out at them, excited, and Pa was excited too. "Caroline," he said, "here's a strange thing. Come look." All across the dooryard, the grasshoppers were walking shoulder to shoulder and end to end, so crowded on the ground that it seemed the ground was moving. Not one single grasshopper hopped. Not one turned its head. As fast as they could go, they were all going, walking west. Pa stood beside Ma looking. Mary said, "Oh, Pa, what does it mean?" And Pa said, "I don't know." He shaded his eyes and looked far to the west and the east. "It's all the same as far as I can see. The whole ground is crawling west." Ma whispered, Oh, if they'll all go away." They all stood, looking at that strange sight. Only Carrie climbed onto her high chair and beat the table with her spoon. "In a minute, Carrie," Ma said. She kept on watching the grasshoppers walking by. There was no space between them and no end to them. "I want my breakfast," Carrie shouted. No one else moved. Finally, Carrie shouted, almost crying, "Ma, Ma." There, you shall have your breakfast," Ma said, turning around. And then she cried out, "My goodness!" Grasshoppers were walking over Carrie. They came pouring in the eastern window, side by side and end to end. Across the windowsill and down the wall and over the floor. They went up the legs of the table and the benches and Carrie's high stool, under the table and the benches, over the table and the benches, and over Carrie. They were walking west. "Shut the window," said Ma. Laura ran on the grasshoppers to shut it. Pa went outdoors and around the house. He came in and said, "Better shut the upstairs windows. Grasshoppers are as thick walking up the east side of the house as they are in the ground, and they're not going around the attic window. They're going right in." All up the wall and across the roof went the sound of their raspy claws crawling. The house seemed full of them. Ma and Pa swept them up and threw them out the western window. None of them came in from the west, though the whole western side of the house was covered with grasshoppers that had walked east over the roof and were walking down to the ground and going west. That whole day long, the grasshoppers walked west. All the next day, they went on walking west. And all the third day, they walked without stopping. No grasshopper turned out of its way for anything. They walked steadily over the house. They walked over the stable. They walked over Spot until Pa shut her in the stable. They walked into Plum Creek and drowned. And those behind kept on walking in and drowning until dead grasshoppers choked the creek and filled the water, and the live grasshoppers walked across them. All day the sun beat hot on the house. All day it was full of the crawling sound that went up the wall and over the roof and down. All day grasshoppers' heads with bulging eyes and grasshopper legs clutching were thick along the bottom edge of the shut window. All day they tried to walk up the sleek glass and fell back, while thousands more pushed up and tried and fell. Ma was pale and tight. Pa did not talk and his eyes did not twinkle. Laura could not shake the crawling sound out of her ears, nor could she brush it off her skin. The fourth day came and the grasshoppers went on walking. The sun shone hotter than ever, a terribly bright light. It was nearly noon when Pa came in from the stable shouting, "Caroline, Caroline, look outdoors. The grasshoppers are flying." Laura and Mary ran to the door. Everywhere, grasshoppers were spreading their wings and rising from the ground. More and more of them filled the air, flying higher and higher, till the sunshine dimmed and darkened and went out, as it had done when the grasshoppers came. Laura ran outdoors. She looked straight up at the sun through a cloud that seemed almost like snowflakes. It was a dark cloud, gleaming, glittering, shimmering, bright and white as she looked at it higher and farther up. And it was rising instead of falling. The cloud passed over the sun and went on far to the west until it could be seen no longer. There was not a grasshopper left in the air or on the ground, except here and there a crippled one that could not fly but still hobbled westward. The stillness was like the stillness of a storm. Ma went into the house and threw herself into the rocking chair. "My Lord," she said, "my Lord." The words were praying, but they sounded like, "Thank you, thank you." Laura and Mary sat down on the doorstep. They could actually sit on the doorstep now. There were no grasshoppers. How still it is, Mary said. Pa leaned in the doorway and said earnestly, I would like someone to tell me how they all knew at once that it was time to go, and how they knew which way was west and their ancestral home. But no one could tell Pa.